This is America's Roundtable from Washington, D.C., a weekly radio program with leading voices and thinkers representing the academia, business, media, think tanks, and the political arena. I'm Joel Anand-Sami, your co-host, joined by Natasha Srdoc, economist, co-founder of the International Leaders Summit. We're delighted to have Virginia Walden-Ford join us on America's Roundtable this weekend. Virginia Ford is a visiting fellow in domestic policy studies at the Heritage Foundation, where she specializes in school choice and education reform. An independent consultant on family, marriage, and education matters, Walden-Ford served as executive director of DC Parents for School Choice Incorporated, which she founded in 1998 until 2011. In August of 2011, she moved back to her hometown of Little Rock, Arkansas, and currently serves as an executive director of the Arkansas Parent Network, which she launched in January of 2012. This organization seeks to empower parents in the state of Arkansas who wish to make informed decisions on educational choices for their children. In 2003, tireless efforts by Walden-Ford and other parent activists resulted in approval by Congress of the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, which provided a way out of the city's failing public school systems to hundreds of children from low-income families. Cash awards offset tuition when parents enroll selected children in private, parochial, or charter schools. The successful scholarship program continues to come under attack by lawmakers and leaders of the government education unions who succeeded in convincing the Obama administration to pull the plug on new scholarships. Walden-Ford was a founding member of the Black Alliance for Educational Options, Incorporated, and is a board member of the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. She is a native of Little Rock, Arkansas, where her father was a principal who became the school district's first black assistant superintendent, and her mother was among the first black teachers at an all-white elementary school. Virginia, it's a great delight to have you join us here on America's Roundtable.
Welcome, Virginia.
Oh, thank you. I am so delighted to be here.
Virginia, we'd love to hear about your story, and could you share your story with us and our listeners? And also, what were the factors that led you to launch your school choice initiative?
Well, in the late 90s, I had some little bit of success with my older children in school, but by that time, my youngest son was going into the school system, and I just saw things changing for him. He was failing, he was getting in trouble, he was just not getting what I thought he needed. And I was a single mother, raising 3 kids in Washington, and had kind of been the behind-the-scenes mother. I had never been real involved, but a little bit involved. But what I saw was really scaring me because I really believed that I was losing this child. And as far as the education system was concerned, and I began to get involved, and the system actually dismissed me. Every time I went to the schools to talk to them about how William was doing, they just kind of dismissed me. And I thought at that time there has to be something different. I was really devastated because I thought I was going to lose this child. And a neighbor came by one day and said, we have to do something to help this child. And I agreed, absolutely. And he offered to provide a scholarship along with some friends of his for me to send William to any school that I chose in Washington. And it was just this eye-opening moment, Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, I really could look at my child, I could look at his learning style, and I could pick a school that would be that he could really thrive. I mean, I really believed that. So we went around and looked at a number of schools, and we chose a Catholic high school in Washington that had a really good reputation for working with boys, and we enrolled him there, and he just thrived. I mean, within weeks, I saw a difference in this child. I mean, he just wanted to go to school, and he was committed and interested and excited. And I asked him, he was 13, I said, what is changing? I mean, what has caused this change in you? And he said, Mama, for the first time, people care that I learn other than you, and I feel safe. And it was just this moment where I thought, this is what children need educationally. We need to do something to provide that. And right at that moment, there was a movement going on, beginning talking about school choice, and there was a scholarship initiative that was being introduced in Congress by a number of Republicans, Dick Armey, and a number of Democrats Floyd Flake from New York. And I talked about my story with them, and, it just kind of skyrocketed. It's like all of a sudden we were saying out loud, we want something different for our kids. We don't want them to, fail in traditional public schools that are not serving their needs. And I felt very committed to make sure that not only my voice was heard, but other mothers. And so we went around D.C. and we talked to other parents about their voices being heard about their children and how they were doing in schools. And it just was tremendous. I mean, the kind of response we got in 1997 was just absolutely tremendous. And it kind of started there.
Some would call you, Virginia, a pioneer in the school choice movement in modern-day America when we look at the challenges that this particular issue has faced over the years. And I'd like to just remind our listeners about a recent piece written by Bill Bennett, former Education Secretary in President Ronald Reagan's administration. And he wrote, and I quote, "Almost everyone from educators to government officials to industry experts laments the lackluster abilities and performance of our nation's students in science, technology, engineering, and math, now known as STEM education. Two indicators," he says, "are particularly worrisome, especially as this country experiences greater global competition and high unemployment. American students scored 23rd in math and 31st in science when compared with 65 other top industrial countries. In math, we are beaten by countries from Slovakia to the Netherlands and Singapore. In science, we are beaten by countries from New Zealand, Estonia, to Finland and Hungary." Virginia, as we look at some of these statistics and these very troublesome findings, and as we look at the school system in America, we notice that specifically low-income families are adversely affected by failing school systems. What can we do as American citizens to see a renaissance in the American educational system, in the sense that when we look at our tertiary education, universities are doing well, where students from around the world are coming to America for higher education. However, our elementary and secondary schools are failing them. What do you see as solutions in adding competition to our system?
We have to, number one, we have to ensure that all parents are able to choose education for their children from a variety of options that will prepare our kids to maintain and expand the blessings and responsibilities of a free society. We have to make sure that we provide all Americans with access to educational choice. And we have to look at these young people, and we have to determine, understanding that we are not competing on a global fact. We are really failing our kids. Our kids are really being let down by us. So we have to provide other options that will bring them back into a competitive world. And that's what we're doing with school choice. We are making sure that not only do the children get what they need as far as safety and all those kind of things are concerned, but that they academically are able to get all the things, the tools they need to compete. And that's why, we support vouchers, because we want parents to be able to choose schools that work for them, as I did with William. I looked at what was in his best interest. Where would there be a school that would serve him well? Mm-hmm. And he thrived. I mean, he actually became a student athlete and graduated with almost a 4-point grade point average. And this was a child that everybody had just kind of, put aside, dismissed. He was going to fail. So we know that if we give parents and the tools to look at educational options as they will benefit their children, they will succeed. Kids just thrive in some of these programs. We've seen incredible response from children in D.C. through the D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program. We are now seeing our kids just do very well in college. And, we have superstars, but their stories are tenfold. Children that are able to have access to educational environments that meets their needs do well. We know this. So we have to make sure that we're providing these options for children and allowing the states to determine what programs will best benefit the children in their states. I mean, I think it's appalling that more federal intervention in education is on the horizon, if you will. I mean, I think that we have to determine in the states what is best for our kids. We know our kids. And parents have to be a part of that conversation. And that's one of the things that I have been really involved in, making sure that parents know that they have a voice, because most of them don't know it.
In a recent speech, Secretary Rice mentioned that today, when I can look at your zip code and I can tell whether you're going to get a good education, she continued by saying the crisis in K-12 education is a threat to the very fabric of who we are. Right. And also, she said, it is a civil rights issue of our day. On the other side, we saw Obama administration's 2013 budget canceling out the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program.
Yeah.
And I read one of your articles where you said, administration has chosen to stand with the special interest groups and not with the children who need him to stand for them. Could you kindly elaborate on this?
You know, I've talked with Secretary Rice so many times about this issue and how we have a responsibility to make sure we stress that this is so serious that if we don't do something to make sure that kids have access to quality education, our future will be impacted. You know, I grew up in a southern school system. I actually went to segregated schools. And in 10th grade, after the LORC 9 went through in 57 and schools didn't integrate really quickly, the federal government said, you know, we have to continue the integration process. So in the mid-60s, I, along with 134 kids, were almost handpicked, if you will, to go into the white school in Little Rock. And I remember my father saying, we thought we'd follow our siblings to the black high schools. And when we were chosen to go to Central, I remember telling my father I didn't want to go, and he told me, then you have a responsibility to go to Central, to do well, because you have younger siblings. So we as Americans, we have a responsibility to make sure that we continue to fight for quality educational environments for our kids, because those following us will be impacted by what we do right now. You know, for 2 years we fought with the Obama administration to support the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. This was a program where kids were coming into it where you could stand in the windows of the White House and you could see their homes. And so it was just devastating to us that we got so little support. But, you know, people around the world fought on our behalf. People around the world called in and said, it's not fair to take this program away from these children, because we had researched that this program was making an impact on their lives. And the one thing that I think people don't understand is if a child's life is impacted by a quality education, it changes communities, it changes families. And so, I mean, my message or my cry is we have to make sure that we continue to educate children so that the future changes for us. And so with the fight for 2 years, we were committed to making sure that people understood that this was a desperate fight. And the Obama administration constantly fought against us, and almost to the end. And, you know, I remember Speaker Boehner saying to me one time, we will win this fight, Virginia, we will. And he, you know, spent a lot of time he and Senator Lieberman and so many other members of Congress spent some time trying to make us believe that we would win, and in the end, we were able to. But it is constantly under attack, as are other school choice programs around the country by special interest groups. And that to me is just, I think it's unforgivable. I think that at the end of the day, folks need to look at what they're saying, and because the bottom line is making sure that my grandchildren will not say to me one day, Grandma, why didn't you fight for me to get a better education? Why am I failing? And that's what this is all about. This is about making sure that we put in place education system, if you will, that will benefit our children. And every child doesn't learn the same. So we got to make sure that we have other options that are available to children so that they can get the best they can from education.
Just talking about the special interest groups, I found some statistics. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, from 1989 to 2012, the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers donated more than $79 million to congressional and presidential candidates. And that doesn't include additional millions spent on lobbying on state and local races. And right. it placed them at the biggest spending special interest group in the country, with another fact that most of the money has gone to Democrats.
Yep. And unfortunately, you know, that is exactly what has happened. And somehow along the way, they've lost knowledge of the fact that were it not for the children, they wouldn't even have an organization. I mean, I think it's very sad. And a lot of Democrats have certainly come over to the school choice side, but there are a lot of people that believe that they cannot continue their candidacies without the money from teachers' unions particularly, and they just jump on that and take advantage of it. The bottom line is we all need to work together to make sure that children receive a quality education, and we will continue as advocates to fight to make sure this happens, you know, and that, you know, the Chicago strike, I think, was just glaring in the faces of people understanding finally, this is just wrong. Teachers going out affecting hundreds of thousands of kids for any length of time is just wrong. And teachers were saying, we don't want to strike. You know, we want to be in our classrooms and we want to work with kids because the memberships of those organizations understand that we must help the children, and that is not happening in the higher ranks. And to me, that's just bad. It's wrong. But we have, which is one of the reasons we have to continue to do what we do. There are a lot of us that have been in this fight for a long, long time. It's been almost 20 years for me. And to still be having to fight for children to receive a quality education is appalling, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, as Americans, we need to be looking toward the future and looking at what is in the best interest of the children. And so many people do not do that. So it's devastating. To me, when I look at children who are not learning, who are not accomplishing what they need to in school to take them to the next levels, it makes me very sad.
Virginia, as you were able to articulate to our listeners through your comments about the concerns of American parents, and as you mentioned about the issues that are facing both Democrats and Republicans, this ought to be not a Democratic or Republican peripheral issue. Education should be a fundamental issue that should unite Americans to address the problem and come up with principled solutions. And,
absolutely.
And in fact, as we look at the global competition, which is a real issue for American students today, if we are not able to compete in the global marketplace, America will be relegated to substandard standards of living, in a sense. And the other issue that is so important is that education ought to be a centerpiece of reforms in America. One of the things that I noticed about the work that you've done, and I was able to peruse through some of the articles that you've written, in one of the pieces you wrote, in 2003, DC Parents for School Choice rallied hundreds of parents from across the district to do something about it. And then you mentioned about that we organized behind a simple idea that low-income families should have the power to choose the best school for their children. And then you communicated that in a town of lobbyists, walking the halls of Congress may not seem like an adventure, but for our parents, it was an important journey, the first real chance they'd had to make their voices heard. And what I was inspired by, you shared that office by office, you told your stories. And you talked about the problems your kids were having with the public school system, and you explained that they deserve something better. And you mentioned that we have heard the word no more times than I'd like to remember, but we never gave up, you said, because we remembered what was at stake. And that is an inspiring story of an American family that is deeply committed to addressing this issue of education in America.
It was incredible to me. I saw people who had never spoken out about how they felt, who were just hopeless, and helpless. They felt like, there were all these obstacles in their way to even talk about how their children were doing. And, the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program fight, which it was just inspiring. I just looked at those parents, and every day more and more parents were added to the mix, and then I'd hear them tell their stories, and I'd listen to legislators, listen to them, and it was just an incredible movement. But we've seen it all over the country. We have seen everywhere I've ever gone to visit and to talk to parents, I've heard the same stories, and I've heard the same desire to tell those stories in a way that would really bring about change. Initially, all the programs benefited families who were in the worst schools in public school systems and who just had no idea that they even had a right to speak out on behalf of their children. And this was all over the country. When I closed my eyes, every parent sounded just like the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program parents had sounded, desperate to have something better for their children. This journey has been incredible for me. I've gone from, one parent speaking out on behalf of my own child to hearing thousands and thousands of parents across this nation that just want what's best for their kids.
Indeed.
And legislators have a responsibility to listen to them. We heard them. I remember one case in particular of a legislator who we just had taken a group of parents to his office, and we'd go in and sign in and visit with the staff, and it's very seldom did we see the legislators, but we'd sign those guest books and we'd let them know we had been there. And this particular legislator walked in while we were there and said, who are these people? And he was told who we were, and he invited us to come into his office, 50 of us. And he found chairs for everybody, and everybody was able to tell their stories. And I could see the change in his position right at that moment. Mm-hmm. He said, never have I listened and heard was the key word, what people really felt, because most people don't think they have a right to say anything.
This is a simple, actually, policy issue when you think from a public policy point of view. Instead of, everybody's paying for education, we're paying taxes. So the government is paying the schools. Why not have a voucher program where the money follows the child?
Exactly.
In that way, we would take away the lobbying mechanism. This would be actually a paradigm shift and a solution for every state to adopt voucher system, where then the parents decide on the taxpayers' dollar spent, and there wouldn't be any lobbying. Lobbying wouldn't be effective because the legislators wouldn't be able to decide on how much should be spent on any school or any pay raise, or pay raise would be more in a competition way. Wouldn't you think so?
Absolutely. And, it was really interesting because in D.C., people had told us at the beginning that parents would not stand up and speak out about their children and they wouldn't fight. And so when thousands of parents came and said, we want something different, and the voices of the people were heard, then they had to make some changes. And I believe that that's what has happened in other states, and what continues to be something that is successful in moving forward. The voices of the people are being heard. And when the voices of the people are heard, then changes can occur. And we as Americans should be able to determine what we spend on education. More and more money every year goes into the education system, but is that money reaching the children? And we should be able to make a decision on what money supports our children's educational journey. I'm a firm believer that the money should follow the children. The parents, who are the first teachers of the children, we are. Indeed. We know our kids better than anybody, and we should be able to make a choice on how and where they're educated. And I know with my son, He's 30 years old now. He is this really fine man, and I have no reason to believe that he would be where he is today had it not been for an opportunity for me to choose where he went to school, where he was educated, and where he just flourished. And I've seen hundreds and I've seen thousands over the last 20 years of parents who have seen the same changes in their children when they were able to make a decision about where and how they were educated. It's an incredible scene to see when parents are empowered to speak about their children and empowered to be a part of the education system. We have seen parents become, if you will, education consumers. I mean, they study, they look at everything, they know what their children are doing in schools. And these were parents who have just never had a voice, and we must, as Americans, give parents a voice.
In fact, Virginia, as we've been talking about global competition in the area of education, where the education scores of children are much better and much higher in other countries when compared to America. According to the World Bank, it talks about voucher system. In fact, it talks about the Netherlands. It states that Netherlands is another country which illustrates the effectiveness of vouchers. 70% of the enrollments are in government-financed private schools. On average, these students tend to be from families which belong to low-income families when compared to those from pupils attending public school. And yet test scores achieved are higher. The World Bank also talks about Colombia. Colombia has a targeted voucher system. Chile has a universal voucher program which it introduced in 1980. There are other institutes that have talked about the voucher system and school choice in Sweden, in Denmark, and New Zealand. And when we read off these list of countries, these countries are doing better than the United States of America. And
Absolutely.
If legislators want to see empirical evidences, they certainly need to pick up the World Bank study and other studies to show why we are not competing and doing well.
You're absolutely right. I mean, those of us in the school choice movement, we've looked at other countries around the globe, and we've seen how well kids do when parents are involved in the educational experience by being able to choose schools that best meet the needs of their children. It has always disturbed me that legislators here in the United States have not been willing most of the time to take a look at what has succeeded around the world and make sure that whatever we do here in the United States will elevate our children to a better position in the global market. It's just been really devastating to see that, and yet, there's so many obstacles that get in the way of legislators hearing this. Mm-hmm. And even though there are more and more of us saying it out here, speaking out in the school choice movement, sometimes it's just really hard for people to hear. So I start speeches by saying, we are behind developing nations in educating our children. And we are the United States. We should be the leaders in education, and yet there are too many things that get in the way when legislators are faced or presented with a way to make a change, why this continues to be a fight. It just annoys me that we have to continue to fight to get our children educated properly. We shouldn't have to be doing this. You said it earlier. It's become this whole political issue, and I believe that talking about children and education should never be a part of a political discussion.
Exactly.
We all have children. We all are, so many of us have access to, some child and seeing what some child's future will be like. And that includes all of these legislators. And I contend that they just need to sit down and say, what would I want for my child? And make decisions based on that. But unfortunately, it has become a political fight in this country, and I think it's just terrible. And I'd like to see a change. I mean, I'd like to see people genuinely sit down and say, this is for the kids, and do something to make them be successful. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm tired. I want us to, as Americans, come together and look and see what we're doing and how, I'm still seeing kids not able to read, and or kids graduating from high school that have to have remediation in college their whole first year. I mean, that's just terrible. We shouldn't be doing that. As Americans, we need to be standing up and supporting the children and making sure that whatever we do, no matter what our side of the aisle we're on, whatever we do is to benefit kids.
Virginia, what can Americans do to support the school choice movement? What can they do in their respective states and their communities to raise these issues with their legislators and advance this very important choice that we have?
They have to talk. They have to talk to those legislators, but they also have to understand that they have a right to make choices for their children. I know one of the things we're doing here in Arkansas is going around the state and talking to parents about school choice. And, the kind of response we get is, we never knew we had a right to say anything. We never knew that information could be used to benefit our kids. So we have to go out and talk to legislators. We have to be willing to stand up together collectively and say, we want something better for our children. We are not willing to sit back and watch a system destroy the futures of kids. And that sounds hard, but that's exactly what's going on. Kids are in environments where they're not learning, and, people are not speaking out about it. And ultimately, when they become adults, then we're going to have another generation of kids that are not educated properly. So we have to be willing. It's hard. It's real hard. It was hard for me to stand up and say, I'm not going to take this any longer. I want something different for my child, my William. But we did it, and we stood strong, and we were persistent because we didn't give up, and I won't give up. As long as I'm able to, I am going to fight for quality education for all children. The children that are most affected have been low-income kids because their parents don't feel like they have any right to speak out. Some people who of more affluence had some choice. But in my opinion, we have to fight for every child, whether they're from low-income families or from affluent families. We as Americans have to come together and, make sure that the journey that our kids are on educationally is a successful one.
Virginia, we just wanted to remind our listeners about the investment that we as taxpayers, as families, are placing in our systems today. There are reports that we spend over $500 billion a year on public elementary and secondary education. And on average, school districts are spending $10,591 for each individual student through various programs that they have. And this is significant. We're not talking about a drop in the bucket. We're talking about significant resources that are being invested in a system rather than investment in individuals. And
Exactly.
I've appreciated your very candid comment on the aspect of remaining in this very important movement and the struggle. You've communicated about the importance of not giving up, and I heard an interview that you had with a television station not too long ago in which you shared about your experiences with Milton Friedman. We also have we have a mutual friendship through Milton Friedman. Of course, Milton Friedman passed away in 2006, and this year we celebrate his 100th birthday. And
Right.
What were your experiences with the Nobel laureate Milton Friedman, and what did he share with you to continue this fight?
Well, it's really interesting because the highlight of my life was certainly meeting Milton Friedman. But during the fight, when things got really difficult and when we were struggling, I remember getting a phone call from him, and I was just so delighted. And what he said to me was, Virginia, don't give up. You have a responsibility as a parent, as an American, to continue to lead the effort to make sure that children get a quality education and children get the education that their parents want them to have. And he just keeps fighting. And, that every single time this fight gets hard and every single time somebody stands up and says, we have to continue to keep our children in educational environments that are not working for them, and they don't understand school choice. I hear his voice, and it keeps me going. I mean, and certainly there are a lot of heroes in this movement, John Boehner, many of them, but that one voice has resonated in my head so many times. I've awakened hearing him saying, "Don't give up, keep fighting," and I will.
That's great. It's truly inspiring, and it should inspire our listeners and American families that have children in school systems to stand up and take a stand.
Absolutely.
Right. And Virginia, when you look at the whole picture, we're having such benefits to individuals and societies. And you mentioned it changes communities, it changes the lives, it improves the future, it lowers the crime rate. I mean, there are incredible benefits for the society. And on the other side, we have, as I see it, unions that are looking at how they're supervised, how they're evaluated, who is granted tenure, on who is dismissed. How do you see that barrier being removed in the very near future? Because obviously the benefits to the society and to individuals is so huge.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the teachers unions really have to stand up and say that, they have been doing things that have affected how kids are learning in the classroom. They need probably some kind of organization that is their professional organization. I have no problem with that, but what I do have a problem with is teachers' unions putting obstacles in the way to teachers teaching in the classroom. And so that has to change. They have to be willing to kind of step down and allow teachers to be creative and innovative in their classrooms working with kids. I think what happened along the way is that they became this source that prevented teachers from being able to do what they want. I mean, when I talk to teachers, I'm from a family of educators. My sisters who teach now and my parents who taught, they were involved and committed to making sure that every child in their classroom got what they want. And then all of a sudden, the teachers' unions came along and said, you can't do this or you can't do that. And that was disruptive to the education process. I think they forgot that their members are teachers. Their members are people that are committed to children. They're wonderful people. Right. And I think that if somehow they could remember that, I watch my sister, who is a teacher right now, how she gets involved in her children's lives and how, she comes out of her own pocket to buy things for kids and encourages us to do so as well. I mean, I think that they've forgotten that somehow. I heard the general counsel of the NEA retired at some point a few years ago, and I remember hearing a speech that he gave where he said the NEA didn't care about whether kids learned, they cared about their members. And I remember I was just appalled that anybody would say that out loud, and it's documented. And that made me really nervous and scared for the kids, for teachers, because I have the utmost admiration for people that go to school every day and teach my children. Right. But when there are limits placed on them, then it becomes a whole different situation. And we've seen that in Chicago. We heard interviews from teachers saying, I want to go back to my classroom.
Indeed.
According to sources involved in the negotiations during the Chicago's teachers' strike, the union wanted to keep teachers who could not find a new teaching position due to the layoffs, and they wanted to keep teachers on district's payroll indefinitely. A similar policy has cost New York City more than $100 million to pay for teachers who were not working, who were not teaching.
Yeah.
If we had a voucher program, we would certainly not get into that position.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I believe that as I watched the Chicago negotiations between Chicago Public Schools and the Teachers Union, it was almost a joke, I mean, Chicago was saying, we just want what's best for the kids, and these kinds of things will make it better. But keeping teachers paid who are not teaching has been absurd anyway. New York had the rubber rooms where teachers went when they were not able to teach for some reason, hundreds and hundreds of teachers. And that's not the goal we want to achieve. We want to make sure that the best teachers are in the classrooms and that those that are not able to teach go somewhere else, and not have access to our kids. And so that part of the negotiation, which I actually caused some of the breakdown, was just absurd to me. And unfortunately, the Chicago public school system was able to make it where those kind of teachers would not be supported, and that was good. But it's a constant problem. I mean, we've talked about celebrating teachers, and we do want to celebrate those that are involved and committed to educating our children, but the reality is there are some people that are not, and there are some people that are really hurting our kids, and those are the people that we need to have some kind of mechanism in place to get rid of. I was kind of cautiously pleased with the changes that were made in the Chicago contract that brought teachers back to the classroom, but I still think that there's too much support for people that shouldn't be teaching our children, and that we need to make sure that that does not continue to happen. It just makes it appear, in my opinion, that all teachers are somehow affected, and that one bad teacher can really make a difference in a school,
Right.
and how kids are educated. So, my sister was telling me a story about a young teacher in her school who had come in with enthusiasm and commitment and energy and excitement about teaching kids. And in one meeting, there were teachers that may not have, probably shouldn't have been in there, who were complaining about stuff, and it changed his behavior. And that's not what we want to see. We don't want to see young teachers coming in with excitement and having their excitement diminish because of just silly complaints or people that shouldn't be in there teaching in the first place. So when I was growing up, I know principals had such an incredible responsibility of leadership in I was educated in public schools, but I know that if there was not a teacher that was doing well, then the principal could make sure that teacher did not have access to the kids. And so, so much has changed in the traditional education now, where the bureaucracy has taken over the leadership of the schools and has limited what principals are able to do, because I think that what makes a really outstanding school is the leadership. And not just schools, in all walks of life. The leadership makes a difference. Even when I first started, I remember some of the people that kind of mentored me said, if you are not committed, people will see it. If you are calling yourself a leader and you're not doing what you need to make sure that you have success, then people will see it. And then you'll have a lot of people in there that won't be beneficial to your fight. And I take that really seriously, that we have to have in place some way to make sure that people that are not committed to teaching children don't have jobs for life.
Indeed, great. And I think what you've mentioned is a very important point indeed, is that it is not about criticizing teachers. It's the system that has been created that has, in effect, emasculated teachers from the work and the vision that they have taken upon. It's a noble profession, as you've communicated, and we've all been blessed with having teachers that have influenced our lives, whether it be in secondary school, at the university levels, individuals that have taken time and invested in us as individuals. And so we certainly admire the tremendous work that is done by teachers across America in investing in our children, and yet we have to face the reality that our system does not work. It's not functioning. It needs to be fixed. And if we don't look at the principal solutions and look at what's working in other parts of the world, where other countries are producing fine students, well-educated students that are competing in the marketplace, and we are certainly declining in producing and providing students that have all that it takes to compete, then we've got to take a second look at what's happening. And certainly, I think it's an issue, like you've mentioned, it's not an issue of Democrats or Republicans. It's an American issue. It is an issue for all Americans to get behind, and especially those that are that have children in school systems to, as you've mentioned and articulated, to get involved and to know what our rights are as citizens. Virginia, what would you like to share with our listeners in your closing thoughts and in fact challenging them in the efforts that you've been working toward over these years?
I'd like to see everybody in America stand up and say, we are going to do what is best for the kids. We're going to put aside politics. We're going to get rid of bureaucracies. We are going to only concentrate on what we can do to ensure that the children who are currently in school and in generations to come are getting everything they need, every tool they need to have a successful life, to achieve the American dream. And we have to stand up and do that, and we have to make whatever sacrifices are necessary. We got to get out and talk in meetings. We got to talk to legislators. We've got to come together, standing shoulder to shoulder with all of those people that are out there fighting on behalf of kids. Because the bottom line, if we don't, then it's going to continue to be devastating for our children. You know, we need to look at the successes of children around the nation in programs where they are in educational environments that are best for them. We have to look at those children. We have to look at my son, and we have to say, this is what we need for America. This is what we need.
We thank you, Virginia, for joining us and sharing your inspiring story and your journey in fighting for school choice in America.
Thank you so much for joining us, Virginia.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been my absolute pleasure, and calling me again.
This is America's Roundtable. Visit us at americasrt.com. Follow us on Twitter at americasrt. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook. Like and share.